there is no indication that Trump has put serious pressure on Moscow now. He seems to be accepting all of Putin's narrative about who started the war, about who has the cards to win and so forth, and that Zelensky is to blame and all of that.
Now, senior White House officials have reported, allegedly reported, accused some European leaders of prolonging the war in Ukraine as they grow impatient about the lack of progress with securing a deal with Russia. White House officials have said that Europeans don't get to prolong this war and backdoor unreasonable expectations while also expecting America to bear the cost. Quite a statement, that. Let's welcome Anthony Gardner, former US ambassador to the EU between 2014 and 2017. Anthony Gardner, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
What do you make of the White House? Certainly it feels like there was a momentum after the Alaska meet with President Putin, that Monday meet with all the heads, some of the European heads of states, including President Zelensky on that Monday, but everything seems to have slowed down since then.
Indeed. Well, we shouldn't be surprised. Look, Donald Trump is someone who changes his mind every day, if not every hour. But it's disappointing on so many levels to say something like that. First of all, it's false. It's false because Europe, EU and its member states are actually eager to put Ukraine in a position to strike a fair, balanced deal with Russia, so that Ukraine can become a solid, stable, democratic, prosperous country with recognized borders with security guarantees. I mean, that's not something that I would consider to be unfair, unbalanced to request. The problem is that Ukraine is not in that position today. It's on the back foot. Russia is making advances. And Europe simply wants to put Ukraine in a position to get that kind of a deal by providing the aid, military and financial, so that it can negotiate from a position of some force.
Would you say, though, that, for example, we heard yesterday the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, rejected proposals for a buffer zone between Ukrainian and Russian forces as part of a peace deal, arguing that it does not reflect the realities of modern warfare. Is this what the White House are talking about? Are they saying, look, you're going to have to compromise somewhere in order to bring peace?
Well, I think the concept of compromising on territory is well understood in Kiev. I mean, it is the Ukrainians are going to have to make that decision at the end of the day. It is their country, and they have lost several 100,000 troops in the process of defending their democracy. I don't think that they would reject that concept. But the point is, which boundaries? Is it going to be the boundaries that are current, or boundaries that Putin describes as everything, all of the eastern part of Ukraine, even the territories he doesn't control today? That's something that needs to be negotiated at the table. The problem is that Putin is putting forward, even very recently, maximalist demands, not just in terms of territory, but in terms of who gets to veto the use of peacekeepers. And remarkably said that Russia should have a veto in the use of peacekeepers, who, of course, is a complete non-starter. So there's no real indication that Putin is serious, because he thinks he's winning today. So I don't know what, to answer your question, I don't know what triggered that White House comment specifically. But to say that Europe is actually trying to egg on Ukraine unjustifiably to prolong the war is simply false.
Is this a cause for embarrassment, do you think, for the president? I mean, he got a lot of stick, but he also got a lot of credit for bringing Vladimir Putin to the table in Alaska a few years ago. It certainly was a progress that we haven't seen in the last few years. Many thought this was the beginning, at least, of conversations. Is there a feeling of embarrassment from the White House, which is perhaps why these kind of statements come out there? Because Donald Trump spoke very tough before that meeting in Alaska. He said if he doesn't see any progress, he's going to slap more sanctions for Russia. He's going to get very tough on Russia. He's done none of that.
Well, no, that's the problem. The gap between the rhetoric and the reality is always great. In this case, it's particularly stark. There is no indication that Trump has put serious pressure on Moscow now. He seems to be accepting all of Putin's narrative about who started the war, about who has the cards to win and so forth, and that Zelensky is to blame and all of that. So there's no indication that he's actually putting pressure. The second thing is that he shouldn't have actually called for that meeting in Alaska. It was premature. Now, of course, conflicts of this kind at some point will have to be resolved at the negotiating table with the principals. By the way, the principals including most clearly Ukraine. So I think the meeting should not have been called. He may be realizing, in fact, it was called too early. And now his way out is to bludgeon and threaten, Ukraine to make to cede ground, so to speak.
Do you think that the US has the patience to continue funding Ukraine? A big part of that statement was that the Europeans are putting unreasonable expectations whilst also expecting America to bear the cost. We heard from Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance saying, look, Americans don't want to see their tax dollars being sent to Ukraine. Is there a scenario in your mind where America just washes their hands from this and says, we're done with this. We've tried to bring everyone to the table. It's not happening. We're just going to walk away.
Well, that narrative is so false on so many levels. First of all, the Europeans have agreed to pay for U.S. military equipment. They've agreed to that concept. We will simply buy it and then transfer it to the Ukrainians. So it's zero cost to the U.S. In fact, not only cost, it would be a benefit because U.S. military exporters would be selling their kit.
Yeah.
So that's wrong. The Europeans have said, we understand the U.S. is not going to put troops on the ground. We would put together a reassurance force. Yes, we would like to have a backup U.S. presence, whether it's covering the skies or supplies and so forth, and intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance and so forth, backup. Yes, that is true. But if you were actually doing an analysis of how much this has cost the U.S. taxpayer, it is very little. And I say little because almost all of the money that has been spent by the United States has been recycled back into the United States for purchases of U.S. equipment. And the amount, which I forgot what it is, but it's actually less than what Europe has spent on Ukraine, is, I think, A, well spent, B, lower than the figure, the amount, and third, has been used to actually degrade Russian military capacities for the benefit of securing European peace. I think that's actually a pretty good deal.
Anthony Gardner, thank you for giving us your time. Good to speak. Anthony Gardner there, former US ambassador to the EU between 2014 and 2017.